Are you one of those people who just can't seem to get the hang of adjective endings in German? Well, this might just be the video for you, because I want to show you our new way of thinking about adjectives and all of those endings that you might be having trouble with. If you've been learning tables like this one, then I get it. But there's so much more to understanding how adjectives work than just memorizing complicated tables. So we're not going to be doing that today. But if you stick with me here, you'll have a much better idea of how to use adjectives by the end of this video. So let's get into it. Now we know, of course, that there are two ways of using adjectives. One way, the easy way, looks like this, where the adjective is what's called a predicate adjective, and it's not followed by a noun. And even if you don't know this terminology, you'll know what I mean. Die Brille ist grün, die Kappe ist schwarz, das Buch ist gut. That sort of thing. But often we want to use adjectives directly before the nouns, and that's where, of course, we need to be thinking about endings. And this is also where it gets just a little bit confusing. So what do we need to know in order to use adjectives correctly? It's these things, and I'm sure you know this already. If we look at these nouns, then it's pretty easy to see what their gender is, because in their most basic forms, the article gives us quite a bit of information about the gender, doesn't it? All those nouns with the article der are masculine, all those with das are neuter, and any with die are probably feminine. But if we weren't familiar with the noun, then I suppose they could also be plural. We'll notice something similar happening when we refer to these nouns with pronouns. We'll talk about all of these nouns, the masculine ones, with the pronoun er, which of course means he. And we can refer to all of those neuter nouns with the pronoun es, and all of the rest, regardless of whether they are female or plural, with the pronoun die. Well, so far so good. What has this got to do with adjectives, you'll be asking? Well, bear with me, because we're almost there. Let's look at all of these articles and pronouns. Now, if we had to pick one letter, just the one letter here, that points to the fact that our nouns are masculine, then we'd probably say it's some form of a, since there's an a in der and there's another one in er. And it would be s for the neuter nouns and an e for the others, the feminine ones and the plural ones too. So let's look now at these sentences. Der Kaffee ist lecker, das Bier ist lecker, die Milch ist lecker, die Getränke sind lecker. Again, we can see what the gender is of each of these drinks, because the article gives us this information. And when we can, we mostly want to have something that hints at the gender. Let's replace each of the articles with an adjective. First of all, let's leave any endings off. Heiß, Kaffee ist lecker, kalt, Bier ist lecker, warm, Milch ist lecker, warm, Getränke sind lecker. Now, used like this, the adjectives definitely need some kind of ending. But which ones? Well, we need those very same endings that hint at the gender of the nouns that we've just established. It was some kind of a for masculine because it was der Kaffee, so heißer Kaffee ist lecker. It was some kind of s for neuter nouns because it was das Bier, so kaltes Bier ist lecker. And it was an e for the others because we use the article die, so it's warme Milch ist lecker. And the same for plural drinks. Warme Getränke sind lecker. But often where it can get confusing is when we have an article to. Well, this is actually not too complicated at all. Let's add in some indefinite articles. Now, for our subjects, we know that these are usually just eine, unless the thing we're referring to is feminine, and then we have eine. And we can easily just use these articles with our previous sentences and nothing changes at all. Instead of heißer Kaffee, we could say ein heißer Kaffee ist lecker. Instead of kaltes Bier, we can say ein kaltes Bier ist lecker. And instead of just warme Milch, we can say eine warme Milch ist lecker. And since we can't use the indefinite article with the plurals, that's all the examples we need. But let's look more closely at what we've got here. The feminine nouns are the only ones that use that typical gender letter E on both the article and the adjective. For some reason, it seems really important to be always emphasizing that feminine nouns are indeed feminine. It's hard to miss because of the E here and here. But if we look at the other two, then we can see that only really the adjective tells us what the gender of the noun is. The indefinite article eine only really indicates that the noun is not feminine. So if we compare the article and the adjective, then only one of them is giving us reliable information about the gender of the noun. And we'll need to remember this when we start using the definite articles. So let's go back again to these sentences. Der Kaffee ist lecker, das Bier ist lecker, die Milch ist lecker, die Getränke sind lecker. Looking at these, we definitely know what the gender is for all of them. Der is clearly masculine, das is neuter, and the only way we know the difference between feminine and plural is the plural form of the verb used with Getränke. These all already tell us pretty clearly the genders of the nouns. So let's add in some adjectives, the same ones again, and for now we'll leave the gender endings off. Der heiße Kaffee ist lecker, das kalt Bier ist lecker, die warm Milch ist lecker und die warm Getränke sind lecker. Now, before we start adding in endings, we need to remember what we noticed before. Between the article and the adjective, only one of them is going to give us reliable information about the gender of the noun. And the definite articles already show us the gender. So we won't be adding on those gender endings to the adjectives, but we do need an ending. And the best ending is the smallest possible one, in this case just an E. This doesn't really tell us much other than the fact that the adjective describes the noun that follows. So we now have der heiße Kaffee ist lecker, das heiße Bier ist lecker, die warme Milch is lecker. Oh, and what about the plurals? Well, up until now we haven't had the opportunity to differentiate between feminine and plural because there's only been one place to put an ending, and our basic ending for both is that E. But now we've got an article and an adjective. And since the article is already D, this leaves us with an adjective where we can add on a different ending, one that's different from the feminine ending. And this is why we end up with die warmen Getränke sind lecker. So if we were to look at these nouns, let's see what they tell us. Now, assuming that they're all subjects, then anywhere we have an R, whether it's on the article or on the adjective, then we know our noun is masculine. So it's easy to collect all of these together. Anywhere there's an S, again, it doesn't matter if it's on the adjective or on the article, then we know we have a neuter noun. And it'll be easy to distinguish between the majority of the others if there's two bits of information, an article and an adjective, since the adjective will have that N ending. And of course, this means that the noun can't be feminine. But if you know your way around a German sentence, then you might be thinking, what happens in the other cases? Well, this is a good question. Let's go back to our drinks. Ich trinke den Kaffee, ich trinke das Bier, ich trinke die Milch, ich trinke die Getränke. Looking at these sentences, then again you will immediately know most of the genders from the information in the articles. Den is our new article for the masculine accusative. In this sentence, it's our definite article. So our typical gender letter for masculine is no longer an R, but an N. And if we remember this, then we can do pretty much everything that we did in the last examples. Ich trinke heißen Kaffee, ich trinke kaltes Bier, ich trinke warme Milch und ich trinke warme Getränke. With the exception of the masculine, everything else has stayed the same and will stay the same when we add in our indefinite articles. Ich trinke einen heißen Kaffee, ich trinke ein kaltes Bier, ich trinke eine warme Milch. Now, this is interesting, isn't it? If we look at the information in the articles and the adjectives, as usual, the feminine is making a big deal out of being feminine. There's an E on the article, there's another one on the adjective. But look now at the masculine, because here too, the masculine is also making it really clear. Not only that it's masculine, but also that it's an object. That N ending makes this all pretty clear. Otherwise, with the neuter noun Bier, the gender ending, that S, only appears once. And the same thing happens if we use the definite article. Both the masculine and the feminine make it clear that they are feminine. This is clear from those N endings and the E endings. So now we have Ich trinke den heißen Kaffee and Ich trinke die warme Milch, but what about our beer? It just does what it did the last time. It's not so proud of its gender, so it just shows us once. Ich trinke das kalte Bier. So if you compare this with the other neuter examples we had, you can see that we only ever see one S. Ich trinke ein kaltes Bier, one S. Ich trinke kaltes Bier, one S. Ich trinke das kalte Bier, again, one S. Now, we could stop here, but there are, of course, a couple of other cases to think about. And the good news is that, well, the Germans got a bit lazy here. So if we know which articles we're meant to be using, then using adjectives is also super easy. In the dative, which we've talked about in this video here, we again only have 3 different ways of indicating gender and the fact that we're in the dative case. Masculine and neuter share the EM ending. And it doesn't matter whether it's a definite article or the indefinite, it's the same EM ending. Let's look at some different examples. Ich bin auf dem Hügel. Or even, ich bin auf einem Hügel. Ich bin auf dem Boot. Or, ich bin auf einem Boot. We can't tell the difference between masculine and neuter, and the Germans are past the point of caring here. At any rate, they're not going to differentiate anymore. And we're not even differentiating between the definite and the indefinite articles because they both have the same EM ending. And now, in the dative, we can tell the difference between feminine and plural. Any feminine nouns will be indicated by an article with an R ending and any plural nouns with an N ending. So we could say ich bin in der Wohnung or ich bin in einer Wohnung. It's the same ER ending with both kinds of article. And with the plurals, we now have Ns everywhere. Ich bin in den Bergen. There's an N on the article and another tacked onto the end of the noun. Well, so far so good, but we're interested in adjectives. So let's quickly review those endings. Remember, it was the EM for masculine and neuter, the ER for feminine, and an EN for the plural, with a special note that the noun also has to get an N too, if it doesn't already have one. So if we didn't have any articles, then we know what to do with the adjectives, don't we? Bei schlechtem Wetter bleibe ich zu Hause. You'll see the EM ending that we used for masculine and neuter nouns now on the adjective because there's nowhere else for it to go. All that EM ending does is tell us that the noun is in the dative and it's either masculine or neuter and not much else. Or if we had a feminine noun, we could say something like this. Auf hoher See hatten wir Angst. That ER ending for the feminine nouns in the dative has to go on to the adjective because, again, there's nowhere else for it to go. It's much the same with the plural nouns. In eisigen Höhen hatten wir Angst. We have that typical en ending on the adjective because we don't have an article where we could put it. But let's add in now some articles. And mostly it doesn't matter whether it's a definite article or an indefinite article because the endings are going to stay the same. And here's something useful to remember. If we use an article in the dative, again, it doesn't matter what the gender of the noun is or whether it's plural or singular, the adjective will always have an en ending. Check out these examples. Ich bin auf dem großen Hügel, or ich bin auf einem großen Hügel. Ich bin auf dem großen Boot, or ich bin auf einem großen Boot. Ich bin in der großen Wohnung, or ich bin in einer großen Wohnung. And with a plural noun, ich sitze auf den weichen Polstern. Ich treffe mich mit meinen netten Kollegen. It's easy. Always an en ending when we're using an article in the dative. Otherwise, the typical endings have to be on the adjective. And that's the majority of what we need to know about adjectives and adjective endings. It helps to think about and to remember what are the typical endings that indicate gender in each case. Here again is our table. Make sure you understand what these endings are telling us. They're doing their best to tell us the gender of the nouns. They are not always consistent and not always super reliable, but there are patterns, and I hope you now understand a little bit better about how they work. If this helped clarify adjective endings for you, hit the like button and maybe share it with somebody else who's been battling with der, die and das. And if you've got a tip for working with adjectives, then drop it in the comments to help others. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Alles Gute und bis zum nächsten Mal. Auf Wiedersehen und tschüss.